The night was electric, charged with the buzz of excitement and the hum of determination. I was Elvis Presley, and I was about to step into a new chapter of my life. It was June 10th, 1958, and I was in Nashville at RCA Studio B, surrounded by some of the best musicians in the business. But little did I know, this night would change everything. Steve Scholes, my producer, was pushing hard. He wanted hits, and he wanted them now. The Colonel, my manager, reluctantly agreed to a recording session during my 2-week furlough before I shipped out to Germany. The Colonel always had a plan, but this time it felt like the pressure was on me. We needed to nail these songs, and we needed to do it fast. The studio was buzzing with energy. Chet Atkins, the legendary guitarist, had put together a killer band. They called them a team, and they were the real deal. There was Hank Sugarfoot Garland on guitar, a guy who could play like nobody's business. He'd even played with me before, back when Scotty and Bill had left. Bob Moore on bass, Murray Buddy Harmon on drums, and of course, my old friend Floyd Kramer on piano. And let's not forget the Jordanaires, the best backing vocalists in the business. From the moment we started, I could feel the electricity. Steve was on a mission. He wanted as many songs as possible, and he was pushing us hard. We didn't even get a chance to catch our breath between takes, but the band was on fire. They knew what was at stake, and they were giving it everything they had. We started with I Need Your Love Tonight. The song was upbeat, and the lyrics were playful, but there was something about it that made me want to put everything I had into it. The band was tight, and Hank's guitar solo was killer. I was having a blast, and I could tell everyone else was too. We did take after take, pushing ourselves to get it just right. By the time we got to take 18, we had something special. Next up was a Big Hunk O Love. This one was steamy, with lines that were pure Elvis. The band took it at full force, and I felt the edge of sexuality that had made my early hits so unforgettable. I was totally absorbed, singing and humming along with the solos. We tried different takes, and in the end, we spliced the piano solo from take 4 into take 3. It was perfect, but then came Ain't That Loving You Baby. This one was a bit trickier. We flailed around, trying to find the right arrangement. At first, the Jordanaires sounded out of place, and Hank's guitar work wasn't quite hitting the mark. We tried a faster tempo, and Chet stepped in to help with a walking bass figure on guitar. It took us a while, but we finally got it on take 11. It wasn't my favorite, but it was good enough. Now and then, There's a Fool Such as I was next. It was a familiar song, and Tom Diskin, one of the Colonel's guys, really wanted it. We nailed it with Chet's rhythm guitar giving it that distinctive flavor. Then came I Got Stung. This one was tough, but we kept at it. Hank made some adjustments. I changed the melody where I was tripping up, and the Jordanaires found their place. Finally, on take 24, we had it. The studio was a blur of activity, and I was exhausted, but there was a sense of accomplishment. We'd done it. We'd recorded 5 songs, and every one of them was going to be on a single. I walked out of the studio in the early hours of June 11th, feeling a mix of pride and uncertainty. I was about to leave for Germany, and my future was in the hands of the Colonel and Steve. The US Randall set sail from the Brooklyn Army Terminal on September 22, 1958. As the ship pulled away, I couldn't help but think about all that had happened. The Colonel was a manager without an artist, and the pressure was on. But he had a plan, he always did. And while I was about to embark on a journey that would change my life, I knew one thing for sure. I was going to come back stronger than ever. I was back in the studio, and it had been nearly 2 years since I last set foot in one. The Colonel, my manager, had been pushing for One Night to be released as a single, but I just couldn't get behind it. I thought it was a bit too risque. Despite my hesitations, the publishing company had a deal for part of the royalties, and they were pressing hard for the song's release by October 31st, 1958. The Colonel, always the businessman, convinced me to agree. We paired it with I Got Stung from the June session as the B-side. The single caused a stir, and DJ loved the aside, but both cuts quickly climbed the charts, hitting number 4 and number 8. The single sold more than the last 2 releases combined, even matching the success of Don't and I Beg of You. The Colonel and Steve Scholes, my A&R man at RCA, had their differences. Scholes wanted to use the June recordings for new singles, but the Colonel thought the new masters were too noisy. It was like a never-ending argument. When Scholes suggested A Fool Such As I as a single, the Colonel was against it, but in the end the Colonel's assistant, Tom Diskin, who had always been a fan of the song, convinced me to release it with I Need Your Love Tonight. Both songs shot up the charts, with A Fool Such As I reaching number 2 and I Need Your Love Tonight hitting number 4. The single sold 1 million copies, which was a huge deal. The Colonel's judgment was questioned again when A Big Hunk O Love and My Wish Came True were released in July. The Colonel's favorite, My Wish Came True, only reached number 12, while A Big Hunk O Love, the noisiest of the Nashville recordings, hit number 1. The Colonel didn't waste time dwelling on it. He was already planning the next moves. He repackaged my older singles into a series of EP called A Touch of Gold, and put together 3 new albums, including songs that hadn't been released on LP before. It was all about keeping the momentum going. While I was in Germany, I would sometimes call home, feeling homesick and worried. The Colonel thought about getting me an early discharge, but mostly he focused on keeping things moving. He signed a deal with ABC TV for me to appear on Frank Sinatra's Timex show, and got everything set for my first post-Army single. He even encouraged me to record some songs in Germany, so I bought some home recording equipment. I made some rough recordings with my friends Red West and Charlie Hodge, playing around with old and new songs. We recorded I'm Beginning to Forget You, Mona Lisa, and Take My Hand, Precious Lord, among others. These tapes were a window into my musical thinking, but they were never meant for commercial release. Freddie Bienstock, my music publisher, visited me in Germany and brought demo tapes for me to consider. He returned with a list of songs I was interested in recording. As the spring of 1960 approached, everything was in place. The movie and TV show arrangements were set, and the Colonel was ready to execute his plans. I was about to come home. Finally, the day arrived. Steve Scholes wrote in his column about how he and the Colonel, along with other friends, welcomed me back at Fort Dix, New Jersey. I was thinner, but I felt great. The press conference was a whirlwind, and I was eager to get back to Memphis and relax. But there was no time to rest. The Frank Sinatra TV special was coming up, and I had to start working on the movie GI Blues. The first recording session was scheduled for March 20th in Nashville. Steve Scholes and the Colonel wanted to record in Nashville because the last session there had been fantastic, and the Colonel was still a bit concerned about the sound quality. Bill Black, my old bass player, had his own successful career and wasn't interested in coming back, but Scotty and Jay, were eager to return. Loyalty meant a lot to me, so I kept them on as regular members of the studio band. The Colonel and Steve Scholes gathered at RCA Studio B, and Bill Porter, the engineer, set up the 3-track machine. This was a big deal because it allowed for better sound quality and the option to remix if needed. We all gathered around the piano for some vocal warm-ups, and the tension was palpable. It had been 2 years since anyone had heard me sing. Would I still have it? We started with Make Me Know It, a new song by Otis Blackwell. It was fast and wordy, but we got into it quickly. After a few takes, we had it down. The session went on, and we recorded Stuck on You, which was going to be the first single. We also did Fame and Fortune, A Mess of Blues, and It Feels So Right. The music was alive, and the 3-track process captured it beautifully. It felt like old times, and I knew we were back in business. I remember the room being filled with tension when I walked in. Colonel Parker, the VP from RCA, and Steve Scholes were all there, close enough that I could reach out and touch them. When I started the first song, they didn't say anything, but once I got into it, they started talking about other things. It was like they were finally at ease. The song Make Me Know It really helped break the ice. I had spent some time in Germany practicing the song Soldier Boy by the Four Fellows. I even talked to Freddie Bienstock about recording it, and he made a deal with the original publisher right away. When we got to the studio, Chet Atkins had to remind me to be careful with my B sounds when I sang Boy. But by the 14th take, it all came together, and you could really hear how much I had grown as a singer in the 2 years I was away. We still needed a hit single, so after a midnight break, we went back to work on Stuck on You. RCA had already made the record sleeves with 2 of my pre-Army photos and a hole in the middle, so people could see the label. They had printed Elvis Is new recording for his 50 million fans all over the world, on the cover, just in case I decided to change the song at the last minute. They wanted to make sure they had a hit, so they planned to send 1.4 million copies to stores without even waiting for orders. Stuck on You was picked because it sounded like a classic Elvis hit. It was aimed at my older fans who were ready for a more mature Elvis, but still wanted that rock and roll feel. I didn't really love the song, but I gave it my best shot and finished it in just 3 takes. Then it was time to sing Fame and Fortune, which I really believed in. I've always had big ambitions and some insecurities when it comes to ballads, but I tried my best. The last 2 songs of the night, A Mess of Blues and It Feels So Right, were more my style, gritty and bluesy. I felt right at home with these songs, and the band and I really clicked. By the end of the night, we had recorded 6 songs, and it was the most productive session I'd ever had. The new recording technology made everything sound amazing. After that, we headed to Miami for a TV show called The Frank Sinatra Timex Show. We arrived early on March 22nd and rehearsed for a few days. On the show, I sang It's Nice to Go Traveling, which had special lyrics written for it. Frank Sinatra, Nancy Sinatra, Joey Bishop, and Sammy Davis Jr. each sang a few lines. We also did a duet of Witchcraft and Love Me Tender, where I sang Witchcraft and Frank sang Love Me Tender. I was dressed in a tuxedo, and even though I was nervous, I didn't show it. I felt like I belonged on that stage, and the show was a huge success. It drew 65% of the TV audience that night, and the Colonel had negotiated a big fee of $125,000 for me. As soon as we got back to Memphis, we had another session in Nashville to finish the album. RCA had already designed the album cover with photos from my time in Germany and a blank space for the song list. We started with Fever, a song I love. The band and I did a great job, and it became one of my classic performances. We also recorded Like a Baby, which I sang in just 6 takes. Then came It's Now or Never, the new version of O Sol Mio. I had practiced it a lot in Germany, and I was determined to do it justice. I sang it in 4 takes, and it felt like pure pop magic. We took a quick break for some Crystal Burgers, and then we kept going. We recorded The Girl of My Best Friend, which took us a bit longer, but we got it done. Dirty, Dirty Feeling was a fun, rocking song that we finished in just 4 takes. Thrill of Your Love had a gospel feel, and I poured my heart into it. We also did I Gotta Know, a pop song that I really enjoyed singing. By 4 a.m., we still had more songs to record. We did Such a Night, which had a similar feel to the first 2 songs, and it was another potential hit. Finally, we did Are You Lonesome Tonight, a song the Colonel suggested. It was a sentimental ballad, and I gave it a dramatic, theatrical touch. It was a surprising choice, but it became a strong contender for a single. That night, we proved just how versatile and talented we were. We finished the album, and I was ready for whatever came next. I had just finished a killer session with my band, cutting songs that felt like they were made just for me. We finished Reconsider Baby around 7 in the morning, and I was on a high. The album Elvis Is Back was a blend of everything I loved: blues, rock, and ballads. It was like I had finally found my voice, and the sound was something I'd been dreaming about for a long time. The songs were picked carefully, and the band was tight. It felt like we were invincible, but the high didn't last long. After a few weeks, I was back in the studio, this time for my first movie since the Army, GI Blues. The Colonel and I wanted to keep my image as the wholesome American boy, and the movie was supposed to help with that. The Colonel had his own rules, though. He wanted to control every song I sang, making sure the publishing rights went to his companies. It was a business, and he was the boss. The first sessions for GI Blues were set up at RCA Studios in Hollywood. The studio was different from what I was used to, and it made me uneasy. The songs were okay, but they didn't have the same spark as the ones we'd done for Elvis Is Back. Shopping Around was a decent pop song, but it sounded flat. Doing the Best I Can was better, but the rest of the songs just didn't fit me right. We tried our best, but the sessions were tough, and everyone could tell it wasn't going well. Things got even more complicated when there was a problem with the copyright for Tonight Is So Right for Love. We had to go back into the studio a week later, and this time I insisted we record at radio recorders, where we had more control. The second session was better, but it still didn't feel right. We managed to get through the songs, but it wasn't the same magic as before. The Colonel and the producers were happy with what we had, but I wasn't. I knew I could do better, and I felt like I was being held back. The movie was important, and I wanted it to be good, but the songs just didn't match the energy I had when I was back in the studio with my band. Despite the challenges, GI Blues was moving forward, and I had to stay focused. The Colonel and I both wanted me to be a movie star, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I knew I had more to give, and I hoped the next project would be different. For now, though, I had to keep going and make the best of what I had. I couldn't believe how much had changed since I got back from the army. The first day back in the studio, I felt a bit out of place, but things started to click when we went to radio recorders. Thorn Nogger was a genius with the sound. He added a little echo, and suddenly, my voice didn't sound flat and dry anymore. We did a speeded-up version of Big Boots, and a new take on Shoppin' Around. Both songs were way better than anything we'd done on the first few days. We were recording for a movie called GI Blues. We had to work with the movie company, and that meant following union rules. After 6 hours, we had to take a 75-minute break. I was in a hurry to finish, but there was no way around it. When we came back, we started on Tonight's All Right for Love. There was a bit of a mix-up because the original melody was still under copyright in Europe, so we had to switch to a different tune. We ended up using a melody from a Strauss song called Geschichten auf dem Wienerwald. It worked out and we got a good take after a few tries. The break really threw me off. I was joking around, but I could feel the tension building. The guys in the control room and I started to butt heads. I wanted to get it right and they wanted to get it done quickly. After a few more takes, I was pretty frustrated. We ended up using take 10, even though I wasn't completely happy with it. I was still worried about the tempo in Big Boots, so we went back and fixed that part too. The first single after the army, Stuck on You, did well, but not as well as we'd hoped. Only 500,000 out of 1.4 million copies sold. It was a bit of a wake-up call. The Colonel and I knew we had to do something different. The next single, It's Now or Never, was a big risk. It was a cover of an Italian song, and I was really particular about how it sounded. When I got the test pressing from RCA, it didn't sound right at all. I complained to the Colonel, and he had to make RCA redo it. It was a pain, but it was worth it. When It's Now or Never came out, it was a huge hit. It hit #1 and stayed there for 5 weeks. It sold more than 500,000 copies more than the previous single. I was back, and this time I was here to stay. But the hits kept coming with their own set of problems. It's Now or Never was still under copyright in Europe, so RCA had to release The Girl of My Best Friend overseas instead. The UK sales were so good that it ended up being a hit in the US too. The Colonel was pretty unhappy about having to share publishing rights, but it all worked out in the end. 2 months after GI Blues, I started working on another movie, Flaming Star. This time, I was playing a half-breed Indian in a serious Western. We recorded the soundtrack, and I had to sing over pre-recorded tracks which I didn't like. But one of the songs, Flaming Star, had some potential. The studio changed the movie's title from Black Star to Flaming Star, and they wanted me to re-record the song. The Colonel tried to avoid it, but Fox paid us $5,000 to do it. Still, he wasn't sure if he'd let RCA release a single. In the middle of all this, I got the idea to do a gospel album. I loved religious music, and it was a great way to show a more mature side of me. The Colonel arranged for photos, and we got the rights to a bunch of songs. We scheduled the recording session, but it kept getting pushed back because of the movie. Finally, on October 30th, we got to RCA Studio B in Nashville. I was in a Greyhound bus, dressed in black pants and a shiny silk shirt, with a sailor's cap. I had a broken finger from a game of touch football, but I was still excited to record. We started with Milky White Way and His Hand in Mine. I actually arranged and adapted a few of the songs myself. We kept going through the night, recording I Believe in the Man in the Sky, He Knows Just What I Need, and Mansion Over the Hilltop. We took a short break and then came back for more. We did In My Father's House, Joshua Fit the Battle, and Swing Down Sweet Chariot. It was almost dawn when we finished with I'm Gonna Walk Dem Golden Stairs, If We Never Meet Again, Known Only to Him, and Working on the Building. It was a long night, but it felt amazing. I knew this album was going to be special. It was a mix of old favorites and new arrangements, and I couldn't wait for everyone to hear it. The Colonel was happy too. He saw it as a way to show that I was more than just a rock and roll star. I was a mature artist who could connect with people on a deeper level, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. I opened the session with Milky White Way, a black gospel standard inspired by a 1947 version by the Trumpeteers. The song had an earthy, bluesy feel, with a slow, steady groove. Boots Randolph played a deep, whispery sax solo that followed the bass line, and the quartet and soprano voices blended perfectly. Our funky soulfulness redefined the genre, and even the faster takes kept the same soulful confidence. The gospel music I knew and loved was made up of more than just one style. My awareness of black gospel was almost as deep as my knowledge of white gospel. I always took pride in my gospel repertoire, and now I could finally pay homage to the groups that had inspired me and my family during my childhood. The Statesmen and the Blackwood Brothers, my parents' favorite groups, were well represented in this first gospel album session. I chose His Hand in Mine, a song by Mosey Lister, to follow Milky White Way. I harmonized with Charlie Hodge, who knew the genre just as well as I did. We developed an impressive vocal arrangement with the Jordanaires and Millie Kirkham, and we nailed it in just 5 takes. Each song we recorded that night came out as a deeply felt and highly polished gem, and we didn't spend more than an hour on any of them. I stayed with the Statesmen for the next 2 songs, both from a 78 they had released in the early 1950s. I had always admired Jake Hess, the lead singer, and I made an almost perfect copy of I Believe in the Man in the Sky, with a beautiful backdrop from the band. The song list I gave to Freddie Bienstock was carefully researched, but once in the studio, I kept changing things up. When I dropped one of Mosey Lister's songs, When You Travel All Alone, I found another, He Knows Just What I Need. But this song was too spirited, and Charlie Hodge's tenor almost broke trying to hit the high notes. Eventually, Charlie wore out, and Millie Kirkham took over, but it didn't have the same effect as Charlie's voice. We had to include a pop song for the aside. RCA had no material left for a new release, and since the Colonel didn't want to use the songs from Flaming Star, we had to squeeze in a new pop song. We turned Torna a Sorrento, an old Italian favorite, into It's Now or Never, just like we did with O Sole Mio before. Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann wrote the lyrics, and Elvis followed their demo closely. The song required a lot of vocal power, and I held back at first to save my voice. By the 4th take, the band had the perfect spy movie intro, but I was still struggling with the high notes. Ray Walker, the Jordanaires' bass singer, took me aside during a break and showed me a breath control exercise. He taught me to use my stomach to project my voice, and it worked. I practiced and then returned to the studio. After 8 tries, I finally got the ending right and spliced it onto the 4th take. Next, we recorded Mansion Over the Hilltop and In My Father's House from the Blackwood Brothers. These songs were a tribute to 2 of the quartets that had most influenced my singing style. Then we switched to the Golden Gate Quartet, a black gospel group that had been around since the 1930s. Their style was more like the Mills Brothers, with an infectious beat. I had seen them perform in Paris, and even sang with them backstage. I recorded 2 of their songs, Swing Down Sweet Chariot and Joshua Fit the Battle, adding another important strand to the American gospel tradition and my own musical upbringing. The Jordanaires, with their long history in gospel, recorded I'm Gonna Walk Dem Golden Stairs, a song written by their former bass singer, Cully Holt. We recorded it in just 1 take. We were on a roll, and the next song, If We Never Meet Again, was another 1-take master. Known Only to Him, a song recorded by both the Statesmen and the Blackwood Brothers, was another quick success. As dawn approached, I surprised everyone with Crying in the Chapel, a well-known inspirational number. It had been a big hit for Darrell Glenn and the Orioles. We didn't get a satisfactory master that night, and the song wasn't released until 1965. We were short one more gospel cut, so Gordon Stoker suggested Working on the Building, a black gospel song with a swing feel. I liked it, even though I was shy about saying so. The song was as spirited as anything we had done that night, and I enjoyed stepping from the solo spot to blend with the group, just like I had always wanted to do. We finished the session with 13 songs, a new personal record. They were all close to my heart, selected with style and sung with effortless grace. The result was some of the best music I had ever made. The single Are You Lonesome Tonight was released in October, but there were issues with the sound quality. I was angry when the first pressing didn't match the acetate, and the New York engineers had lifted my voice too much. I insisted on remastering it to correct the imbalance. The single hit #1 in 3 weeks, selling 2 million copies in the United States. After the gospel sessions, I went straight to Los Angeles to record the soundtrack for my third 20th Century Fox movie, Wild in the Country. The 5 songs we recorded were pretty ballads, better suited for the movie than the pop market. Lonely Man was picked to back Surrender, and the Colonel wanted RCA to pair I Slipped, I Stumbled, I Fell with the title song. During the filming of Flaming Star, I met Nancy Sharp, a young woman working for 20th Century Fox. She became a new friend, and we often had music nights at my house. A tape from one of these nights shows what life with me must have been like during this busy year of music making and new beginnings. The filming of Wild in the Country wasn't finished by Christmas, but Fox gave me time off to go home for the holidays. From Graceland, I could look back on a remarkable year. I had made 3 movies, recorded 51 sides, and had 3 #1 singles. Elvis Is Back had gone to #2 on the LP charts, and the GA Blues soundtrack was on its way to becoming my biggest-selling album ever. By broadening my musical scope, I had expanded my international appeal. It's Now or Never sold 100,000 copies in Holland and 1 million in England. In the United States, my comeback didn't quite match my 1956 to 57 sales, but my recordings still represented about 20% of RCA total turnover. RCA was doing just fine, and so was I. In March 1961, just a year after I made a big comeback in the studio, I headed back to Nashville to record more songs. I was excited and a bit nervous, but I knew I had a great band and team behind me. Steve Scholes, the A&R guy from RCA, and Bill Porter, the engineer, were there to make sure everything sounded perfect. We recorded at RCA Studio B, a place I was starting to feel really comfortable in. The first song we worked on was I'm Comin Home. It was a new song by Charlie Rich, and I really liked it. We didn't have the sheet music, so we had to figure it out as we went. Steve suggested we get the tempo right, and I needed a minute to remember the lyrics. Once we got started, everything fell into place. The band was amazing, and I felt like I was really connecting with the song. Next, we did Gently. It was a slower, more folk-like song, and Hank Garland played some really delicate guitar. It was a beautiful track, and I think it showed a different side of me. In Your Arms was up next, and it was a quick one. Boots Randolph didn't even have time to come up with a fancy solo, but it still sounded great. Give Me the Right had a bit of a blues feel, and we toned it down a little after the first take. The fourth take became the master, and Millie Kirkham, the soprano singer, added a really emotional wail that made the song even better. We did I Feel So Bad after that. It was an old Chuck Willis song, and I tried to make it my own. There was a funny moment where I walked over to cheer Boots on during his solo, and the saxophone sound ended up in the middle of the track instead of the left side. It happened on both takes, but we didn't notice until it was too late. It's a Sin was a song I had seen Eddie Arnold perform back in 1954. I wanted to get the harmonies right and speed up the arrangement, but the second full take became the master, and it sounded great. I Want You With Me was a Woody Harris song, and I had met Bobby Darin, who had recorded it earlier. I tried to match his phrasing, and the band came up with a cool rock and roll sound. Don Robertson, who had written a song I recorded earlier, gave me There's Always Me. I told the band this is my song, and I really threw myself into it. The ending was challenging, but I was happy with the master. I even played it for Don later, and I could tell he was proud. Starting today was another Don Robertson ballad, and it was sadder and more wistful. We followed that with Sentimental Me, an old hit by the Ames brothers, and the band played it slow and steady. Judy was next, and I played acoustic guitar on it. I told the band to play it twice in D, and we did a cover of Teddy Riedel's 1960 recording. Floyd Kramer's piano work was like magic, and the song was a perfect mix of pop and my Nashville sound. We finished the session with Put the Blame on Me, a bluesy song that fit well on the album. By the end of the session, we had 12 new songs, and I was really proud of what we'd done. Bill Bullock from RCA wrote me a letter saying how happy he was with the album. After the Nashville session, most of the band went to California to play on the Blue Hawaii soundtrack. We recorded at radio recorders in Hollywood, and the producers hired some extra musicians to give the songs a Hawaiian feel. Hal Blaine, a famous drummer, was there to help with the percussion, and we had steel guitars, ukuleles, and even a harmonica player. We started with Hawaiian Sunset and Aloha O, an old Hawaiian song. I wrote the lyrics for Aloha O, and it was really special. We did a bunch of other songs like No More, Slisson Sand, and Blue Hawaii. Freddie Bienstock had written some new songs, and Sid Tepper and Roy Bennett were back with more hits. One of the hardest songs was Can't Help Falling in Love. We did 29 takes over 2 days, and I really wanted to get it right. When we finally finished, I knew we had something special. We ended the session with Beach Boy Blues and Rock a Hula Baby. The last song was a bit wild, and we were all laughing and having a great time. After the recording, we went to Pearl Harbor for a benefit show. It was a big deal, and it was my last live performance for a long time. I was nervous but excited, and the band was ready to go. We played some of the new songs, and it was a great night. I couldn't wait to see what the future held. The studio lights were bright, and the air was filled with the hum of excitement. I leaned into the microphone, ready to let my voice carry the emotions of the songs we were about to record. It was October 15th, 1961, and we were back at RCA Studio B in Nashville. Steve Scholes was our producer, and Bill Porter was behind the boards, making sure every note sounded just right. Scotty Moore was on guitar, and Floyd Kramer was at the piano. Jerry Kennedy was there too, and Boots Randolph was ready with his sax and clarinet. We had a great rhythm section with Bob Moore on bass, and DJ Fontana on drums. The Jordanaires were there to add their harmonies, and Millie Kirkham was there to lend her voice. We started with a song called Night Rider. It was a rocker, and I could feel the energy from the first note. Mort Schumann and Doc Pomus had written it, and they knew just how to craft a song that would get people moving. The demo they sent over had a Phil Spector feel to it, and I knew it would be a hit. We ran through it a few times, and by the end, we had something that felt like magic. Next we tried Just for Old Time's Sake, and For the Millionth and the Last Time. These were both written by Sid Tepper and Roy C. Bennett, and they had a different feel, more heartfelt and a bit slower. I liked the way the lyrics made me feel, and I sang them with all the emotion I could muster. The band played beautifully, and we managed to get some great takes. We also recorded a couple of other songs that the Colonel wanted to keep under wraps for now. I didn't know what they were for, but I trusted him. He always had a plan, and I knew it would be a good one. The night wore on, and we kept pushing to get everything just right. It was hard work, but it was also a lot of fun. The band and I were in sync, and we knew we were onto something special. We were creating music that people would love, and that's what mattered most to me. As the session came to a close, I couldn't help but think about how far we had come. From the early days in Memphis to the big studios in Nashville, every moment had been a step toward something bigger. The Colonel had a vision, and we were all working to make it a reality. Whether it was through the movies or the music, I wanted to give people something that would stay with them, something that would make them feel good. The next day, we went back to our lives, but the music we made that night would live on. It was part of a journey that was far from over. I knew that as long as I had my voice and my band, we could keep making magic, one song at a time.